Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. I've been kind of looking for a while for like a little bit of a catchphrase to say at the beginning of the show. I feel like I've sort of settled on Good Morning, Dog Nation. You don't like that? It's kind of an opening greeting. I sort of feel like that's working pretty well. Nonetheless, we have a very fun and busy show for you here today. It's Jeff Sentell, recruiting talk. That's always a really good thing. I'm going to explain to you on today's show as well why something I tried yesterday, try to be serious and professional and respectable, how maybe that wasn't quite the right tact to take because somebody else swooped in and did it far better than I did on a completely different viewpoint. We'll kind of explain what all that means here coming up in just a moment. Something I probably should have done anyway. We'll give you that. Something very funny from Kirby Smart on today's program. We'll share that. We have a terrific golden shoe that one of our creative audience members has sort of put together. I'm really excited about that there as well. We're kind of in a nice vibe here on a summer Friday, so we're looking forward to all of that. But off the top of the program, I will chastise ESPN. I believe that ESPN has gotten some key details wrong about the Georgia quarterback situation, and I think it's important to correct the record here on this, and I'll also give you some recent words from Kirby Smart on that, and something that a guy who knows his position as well as anybody has also said on the matter there as well. So let's start with that here today. Glad to have you with us as we close out the week. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So obviously one of the biggest topics around Georgia football this offseason, to the extent there even is an offseason, has been about the Georgia quarterback situation. It's always kind of funny to me, and one of the things we like to do around here is, obviously we sort of speak from the perspective of, you know, inside the bubble of Dog Nation. We say this is the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Me, someone who sort of obsesses over every facet of Georgia football. Many of you kind of do your own version of that there as well. So as people who are very zoomed in on one topic, we kind of have one perspective oftentimes. And when it comes to people kind of on the national media part of this, they are much more zoomed out. They are 10,000 foot. They are far removed. And oftentimes, you know, sometimes widening your, I guess, perspective gives you a little bit of a better look at what's going on. But then sometimes when you're farther away, it also, I think, makes you more far removed from what the actual truth is. And I think an example of that from ESPN, who recently had one of these write-ups, and I've actually talked to a couple of our guests about this in recent days, kind of looking at some of the ongoing quarterback competitions around college football. And I'm always interested to see what ESPN says about some of these other teams I don't follow quite as closely, because oftentimes ESPN, who covers everything, can be a little bit of an avenue for me to find out more about a team that I just don't know quite as much about. But when ESPN oftentimes writes about my team, I don't know they quite sometimes understand as well as some of you do. There are a handful of people in this audience. I would care far more about what you think about the Georgia quarterback situation than I would care about what somebody from ESPN thinks about it, just because they're too far away to oftentimes maybe really know exactly what is going on. An example of that in a recent write-up there at ESPN.com, where they were kind of looking at these various quarterback situations, and one of the things that was asked about the Georgia quarterback situation was, well, how much did the situation around Georgia quarterback change because of spring practice? And the writer, his name's Harry Lyles, he said, well, it didn't really change that much at all. And I would say that those of us who watched the quarterback situation play out this year closely, I would say that we would kind of disagree with it. I would say that, no, I thought that spring practice was pretty instructive, at least to the extent that what we saw, you know, on G-Day was reflective of what the spring was overall. I thought it was kind of a big step-up moment for Carson Beck. I thought that Carson Beck kind of asserted himself, and, you know, whisper campaigns and, you know, sort of people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, they seem to suggest some of that there as well. I thought it was a really good spring for Carson Beck. I thought it was a spring in which that Beck kind of demonstrated that he may have what it takes to be not just a starting quarterback, but a successful starting quarterback for Georgia. But the folks at ESPN, I think wrongly, have kind of kept the door open that maybe Beck won't actually be the starting quarterback at all. Let me read you a couple of sentences here from Harry Lyles Jr., the writer there at ESPN.com. I'm not going to pick on Harry. I don't care about him one way or another, but I just want to use this as a way of kind of correcting the record and talking about what is real and what is right when it comes to the Georgia quarterback situation. So Lyles writes that it's safe to say that Beck is going to be the first to get a shot at the starting quarterback. However, if he were to struggle, Georgia's schedule allows, the Bulldogs to experiment and figure out who really is the best fit for the offense. That's interesting. That's Harry Lyles Jr. basically leaving the door open for the competition to continue in season and reserve the right for Kirby Smart to make a different quarterback choice at some point in time during the 2023 season than he seems poised to make right now. Now, I think this is wrong on two fronts. I want to deal with one of these now and one of these later. I think that one of the things that kind of fuels the wrongness of this is the obsession that we sort of have right now with quarterbacks who don't win the starting job. And a lot of this is propelled by the transfer portal of, hey, well, you got to name somebody as the starter, but the thought around college football is, well, you run the risk by when you tell one guy is the starter, you've now told two guys they're not the starter, and by telling them they're not going to start, are you now opening the door and sort of greasing the wheels for one of those guys to eventually transfer? And that's sort of the obsessive conversation around college football right now of, oh, are you worried about losing this guy? Are you worried about losing that guy? Do you have to change the way that you coach because you're afraid of the quarterbacks who are not named starter bolting out the door looking to go to greener pastures? And this is where Kirby Smart steps in, because this week, he's a part of that Regions Celebrity Pro-Am golf tournament prior to the PGA Tour Champions event in the Birmingham area. He does it each and every year. We're actually going to have something funny from Kirby from that event later on the show. But for now, Kirby was also on the morning show in Birmingham, WJOX. They broadcast from the golf tournament. A lot of coaches stop by and visit with them this time of year. Just it's kind of become a little bit of a unofficial tradition, I guess. And Kirby was talking about quarterback stuff. And on the subject that I just mentioned, this obsession that people seem to have with, oh gosh, transfer portal, be careful, choose your words carefully, tread lightly, extend competitions because you don't want to run the risk of losing someone. And Kirby Smart, in so many words, kind of describes a lot of that talk as a little bit overstated. I think this is good from Kirby. It's from this week, WJOX. Take a listen to it.
Well, it was no different 5 or 6 years ago. You could leave then, and you could go then, and you could say there's a hardship. Say I have this issue and I'm gone and I can go play. So I don't know that that's changed. That was always the fear. It's much more talked about. It's much more prominent. The word portal, I think, has just become everybody's favorite word. So, kids want to go shop and go find the best place. So it happens more, but it happened before, especially at quarterback. But for us, it's about getting the best guy. And I think kids have bought into the development factor, the backups, and the guys that may not be the starter. They're saying, yeah, but Stetson wasn't either. And look what happened with him. And he waited his turn, and he was a 3, and he ended up making it.
All right, so let's kind of go through that with Kirby Smart a little bit. As I said before, we get too obsessed with the transfer portal sometimes. We get too obsessed with how do you keep all your quarterbacks happy when, as Kirby Smart, I think, correctly points out there, that what the job really is you got to figure out who your best quarterback is. You can't make everybody happy. You can't be too concerned about everybody's feelings. Your job is you got to find the guy that you can select to be your starter and then develop the offense around him to go out and be as successful as possible this upcoming season. That's what it's really about. It's not about finessing the situation, massaging the situation so everybody thinks they're still in it. Some of this is about really identifying who that quarterback is going to be. And I think that Kirby Smart's absolutely right about that. Now, part of the reason why somebody like Lyles at ESPN would write what he writes is because of what Kirby Smart also says there. Hey, and to the guys that are not starters, think about yourself as Stetson Bennett, a guy who stepped in and emerged, during a year in which he started off as like the number 3 quarterback or whatever else. And so that's obviously, a little bit of a possibility for Georgia. It's certainly been the reality there in the past, but I don't think that necessarily changes the situation in the present, which is that Carson Beck really stepped up. Carson Beck, I think, showed himself to be the most ready to play on G-Day. And there's nothing we've heard from kind of like the whisper campaigns, the online chatter, or the rumor mill, whatever, about the other moments in spring practice that have necessarily been different than that. Right now, it just sort of seems like Carson Beck is the guy. But if you're back and you are the guy and you're preparing for your first year as the Georgia starter, how do you handle that knowing that the other 2 quarterbacks in this situation, Gunnar Stockton, I think, has a very bright future. Brock Vandagriff, I think, is the kind of guy that you could also win with if you had him on the field. So how do you handle that if you're back? Even if you are the starter, how do you make sure you stay starter throughout the season, knowing that capable guys are behind you? Well, I asked that to Jake Fromm when he joined us yesterday. Jake, if you want to go back to his first year at Georgia, think about the situation here. He started that year as a backup to a former 5-star in Jacob Eason. A lot of you remember this, former Gatorade Player of the Year. This is as big a prospect as you could have. Eason gets hurt in the first game. Jake steps in and then goes on the road to start the following week at Notre Dame and, kind of established himself as a successful freshman, stepping in place of what we expect to be the starter in Jacob Eason. But eventually, Eason was healthy again. And eventually, Eason, we think, could have played, and yet Georgia kind of stuck with Fromm. So what I asked Jake was, what's it like trying to be the starting quarterback knowing that someone potentially capable is behind you, and how do you keep playing well without looking too much over your shoulder? That could be an issue for Carson Beck here this year. Jake Fromm, who's been through that at Georgia, gave an interesting answer to that question from yesterday's show. Take a listen to this.
As a quarterback, man, when you're playing with confidence, you're playing with a little swagger, and you feel, the guys around you, start to believe in you. That really makes you feel good as a signal caller and go out and get stuff done. So I never really had that feeling, so to speak. But Coach Smart, when he has this quarterback competition continue to go into the training camp, well, what you do is you allow yourself later in the season, if you do need to make a change, a little bit easier, because those guys have had those reps. Other players on the team have seen this guy throw the football. It's easier to kind of buy into a new guy, and kind of makes that transition a little bit easier. So that'd be one benefit from it. But, the opportunity cost that you lose out on is having a guy like Carson be able to go out and get plenty of reps and feel comfortable with his receivers and all those good things.
So what Jake says at the end there really matters to me. Like, if you're a confident quarterback, you don't really worry about what's behind you. You're focused on your own task, your own mission. And obviously Georgia is very glad. If we assume that Carson Beck is the starting quarterback and remains the starting quarterback, Georgia's obviously really glad to have guys like Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton in the program. That's a level of quarterback depth that obviously benefits UGA. But ultimately, as Jake says there, as it relates to Carson or any other starting quarterback, that this time of year, those kind of summer workouts that quarterbacks oftentimes are tasked with taking charge of, or those actual official practices that will begin in late July, early August that prepare you for the upcoming season. It's about developing the comfort that Beck has as the starter and the comfort that Georgia players have with him. The confidence that Beck has to actually go out and lead this unit, and the confidence that the Georgia players have that Beck really can be the guy they can trust. And by the way, confidence that Georgia coaches have in him to be able to call whatever plays they want to be able to call. That at some point, at a certain point in time, it actually really is appropriate and necessary for the competition to end and for the development phase to begin and the preparation phase to begin. And I believe that based on the way that G-Day played out, that's the direction the Georgia quarterback situation is heading, whether the ESPN folks sort of realize that or not. But then kind of one final point here, that the overarching, I think, thing that the ESPN guys, and Harry Lyles, the guy we quoted from a moment ago, I think the overarching thing they may kind of get wrong about Georgia is sort of related to what Kirby Smart said in the JOX clip that we heard from a moment ago, that this is a coach, Kirby, who's made quarterback changes during the season in the past. He did that with Stetson Bennett in 2021, and so therefore that kind of becomes the template for how Kirby does everything moving forward. But I think what we might be on the verge of, and admittedly this is my opinion, but that's what we do here. We share our opinions. I think what we might actually be on the verge of seeing here this fall is Georgia establishing a quarterback situation that's just a little bit more normal. I mean, if we're honest here, the Georgia quarterback situation has been pretty unusual a lot. I mentioned the Jake Fromm situation in 2017 when he emerged as a true freshman because Jacob Eason got hurt. And then in 2018, the fact that Justin Fields arrived here, even though Georgia had an established starting quarterback, that was probably a little unusual. We've had plenty of smart folks who've described just how unusual that was. Carson Beck himself the other day talked about how weird it was in 2020 with the pandemic and all the odd personalities that Georgia seemed to have in that quarterback room at the time. Bennett emerging in 2021, that was a little bit unusual too. Super successful, but kind of weird how it all played out. And we've had all this weirdness around the Georgia quarterback situation, but now maybe it's just sort of normal. The oldest guy in the room, Beck, looks like he's going to be the starter. The next oldest guy, Vandagriff, he may be the backup. The young prospect, Gunnar Stockton, may have a bright future, but he may have to wait on that because there are guys more experienced than him who may just be more ready to play right now. That's the way the quarterback situations are typically sort of expected to be, and the Georgia quarterback situation may have evolved to something that's a little bit more typical. That may be how all this plays out this year. But ultimately, I think there's actually very little mystery as who the Georgia starting quarterback is going to be. I believe it's going to be Carson Beck. He'll certainly start the season that way. And if the poise and the confidence and just the readiness that he seemingly has displayed, if that really is real and that really is the true version of Carson, then there's no reason to believe he won't end the season as the Georgia starter as well. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how. You get to us live on video, 10 a.m., all across all video platforms. We start even earlier than that at 9:45 on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. We call that our First and 15. It's a little bit of extra content we do especially for those folks who join us on our own platform, and it's been a great, successful, we've been doing this now for a while. It's not even a rollout anymore. We've just been doing it. It's one of those things you have to be there on the site at 9:45 to see it. It's not really archived anywhere or anything like that. So if you want to be a part of the crazy stuff that goes on, they were giving me a hard time on there this morning for some crazy stuff I said yesterday. So if you want to be a part of that, you got to join us, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, in order to be able to do that. By the way, Radio Noon, 960 The Rap, podcast, all kinds of places to listen to the show. We're just really glad that you have done that. And really appreciate our friends at Kroger for making all this possible for you there today as well. Now, this is the time of year when there's so much going on. You got Mother's Day on Sunday, more on that in a moment. But you're also coming up on grad season there too. So we're celebrating graduates. You start seeing a lot of those photos on social media just that time of year. I've even got a graduation in my household this year. My son graduating 5th grade. Excited about all of that. Well, guess what? When it's time to celebrate the grad in your life, Kroger's the place to go to do all that. You can get decorated cakes, party trays, the decorations for the house, and so much more right there at Kroger. Greeting cards, gift cards, everything else in between. All of that at Kroger. So go to Kroger.com/graduation for more on that. That is Kroger.com/graduation for more on that. And by the way, while we are speaking about Kroger, let's go ahead and also give away today our final Kroger Perfect Moms winner. We've done one of these each day. So many great submissions. I wish we could read them all and share them all. We have selected 5, though, at random to be our winners. And it's a great collection of gift cards courtesy of our friends at Kroger going to each of our winners, including today. The winner is Shara Wright. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Shara, I hope I pronounced that correct. She's from Lawrenceville, Georgia, nominated by her son, Bryce. I want to read what Bryce said about his mom. This is great. My mother's been getting another degree, and she's still able to take care of all the things she was doing before school started again. Boy, first of all, don't you love the idea of going out there and getting an education and adding to your degree list, but also still taking care of business at home. Miss Wright doing a great job on all of that. Getting my brothers ready for school, cooking and cleaning, and making sure we have birthday parties. That's awesome to hear. Does a super job. She works as a teacher and mentor and still has time to be a mom and have fun with us. Boy, Miss Wright sounds like a truly, truly special lady and a very deserving winner of our Kroger Perfect Moms contest. We're talking to some folks around the ball field this week about when you're a teacher this time of year, there is extra stuff seemingly going on because you're trying to take care of business with your own kids, but then you're trying to help everybody else's kids too, kind of get to the end of the school year. So for all those folks in our audience who are teachers and taking care of business in that field, we really, really appreciate that, including Miss Wright here, who is the winner of our Kroger Perfect Moms giveaway for today. Congratulations, and Bryce, thank you so much for a terrific nomination there on that. All right, it's Jeff Sentell coming up. We'll do some UGA recruiting talk with him, including details about a big-time 5-star taking an official visit to Georgia. We will get more on that here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the Dawghouse. Served up today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Happy to have them as a part of this. And yesterday on the show, I try to be like really professional and, like sort of like I try to be fact checker. I'm just gonna let you know that maybe something that you heard, maybe something that you talked about, maybe it wasn't necessarily meant to be taken at face value. That we sort of live in this day of kind of like AI, artificial intelligence. There's all kinds of stuff out there that's sort of like computer generated. I'm not saying this was computer generated, but it's one of those things that was not, I don't believe, necessarily meant to be taken at face value. It's sort of done for show, for put on, maybe even kind of a joke within the, I guess, the audience of the show. It was Zack Smith, the former Ohio State assistant coach, who I believe was intentionally trying to give some bulletin board material for Georgia as kind of a funny thing for the show that he's a part of here. Of course, Smith's got his own kind of odd backstory here. To give you an idea of where we want to go today, though, on a topic here for a moment, let me go back and replay the Smith clip that we played yesterday. I think we have this. Here is Zack Smith from yesterday, really kind of talking up and sort of trolling Georgia fans. And yesterday I was trying to tell you, I don't take any of this too seriously. Here's Zack Smith.
The reality is this. Georgia won back-to-back national championships on the back of a ridiculous defense that is gone. That defense is gone. Kirby's little pet project is gone. The run is over. It was a cute 2 years. Back to the abysmal depths of being 8-4. Enjoy, Bulldog fans.
So I told you yesterday, basically, this is too ridiculous to be real. Don't take this seriously. This is just a guy being goofy. In fact, it was even explained to me by someone on Twitter that he might have even been doing this as a way of motivating Georgia because he wanted to bet the 11.5 win total for Georgia, basically predicting Georgia go 12-0 in the regular season. And that might have all been just kind of an inside joke for the handful of people who watch or listen to a Zack Smith show. That might have been, what that was all about there. But here's what you kind of learn sometimes. The fact that it isn't real doesn't necessarily matter necessarily because almost exactly the same time that I was on this show saying, no, don't worry about this. This isn't real. There's plenty of bulletin board material for Georgia that is real. This isn't real. You shouldn't pay too much attention to it necessarily. At almost the exact same time that I was saying all that, someone who knows admittedly far more than me on the subject matter of motivation and getting a team fired up was taking an entirely different tact about this very same clip. It's Nolan Smith, the master motivator, who certainly helped propel Georgia to the national championship this past season. Well, he had heard the same clip that I did, and instead of kind of downplaying it and saying not to worry about it and saying it doesn't matter, let me show you Nolan on Twitter here, whose reaction to this was far different. He said, in my Coach Smart voice, I want this blank playing in every meeting. Every meeting, he says 8-5. So Nolan Smith says, nah, listen, use this. I don't care if it's fake. I don't care if it's real. I don't care what. This just becomes fodder that you can use. So even if it isn't meant to be face value, even if it isn't meant to be real, go ahead and treat it as it is. As if it is. And listen, who am I to argue with Nolan Smith on that after what he pulled this past season? You may remember at the national championship game, there were a bunch of Georgia players walking around they thought we were going to be 7-5. And a lot of media types were looking around, it's like, who picked Georgia to go 7-5 or 8-4 or whatever the record was? Who said that that's what Georgia was going to be? Well, later on when Nolan appeared on the Saturday Down South podcast, he sort of admitted to making it all up. So if that worked for Nolan one time, maybe it's going to work for Nolan again. Let me give you a reminder of what Nolan said about this just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, yeah. You got to create the own narrative, man. Sometimes, you got to put the chip on your own shoulder. But we did have a humongous target on our back, as we saw in the Missouri game. Yeah, sometimes you got to juice it up for the guy, especially when you're old man last year. I just wanted everybody to know. I said it the whole summer. They're going to think we're going 7-5, guys. They ain't even thinking about a 2P. So
you made that entire thing up. You just picked that out of the air. You're like, all right, I'm just going to throw 7-5. That sounds disrespectful enough.
Yeah, 7-5 is disrespectful enough. And that's what Coach Smart did. I think not to disrespect any of the other teams, but I think Coach Smart went 8-4 his first year. So I was like, yeah, 7-5 though sounds better. And it sounds better off the tongue. 7-5.
So here's the point. I do not believe the Zack Smith clip we played a moment ago is meant to be taken seriously. I don't think it's real. I think it's basically pro wrestling. But if Nolan Smith says it's real, then it's real. Because clearly Nolan Smith knows how to motivate the Georgia Bulldogs. And if that's what it takes to go for 3-23, then I say we listen to Nolan Smith and stop listening to me. That's the bottom line and the moral to all of this story. And that is around the Dawghouse, served up today by our friends at the Finished Long Drink. Now listen, it is that summertime of year. And I love the Finished Long Drink when it comes to this time of year. I just like to drink it outside. I think the Finished Long Drink tastes delicious outside. Many of you would sort of agree the same thing. In fact, you send us pictures all the time of you enjoying it, around the swimming pool, certainly on the golf course, and goodness knows we want to try to find our way onto as many of those here this season as we possibly can. So if you haven't tried it yet, I'm not sure what you're waiting on. This is the time to do it. One of the 4 different Finished Long Drink varieties. All the folks in my neighborhood seem to love that Finished Long Drink Cranberry, which, as you might imagine, has that kind of cranberry flavor. I like the traditional. It's a blue can. It's the gin kick, the grapefruit flavor. You got Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long Drink Zero, that's no carbs, no sugar. What this is a ready-to-drink cocktail. So if you like mixed drinks, this is like a mixed drink in a can. You can pour it into a glass over ice. You can just drink it straight out of the can. It's a mixed drink. You don't have to mix yourself. And I'm all about making life easier and simpler. And this certainly does that. Plus, it tastes great there also. So go to thelongdrink.com. You can put in your zip code. You can also find out the really cool backstory here. It starts back in Helsinki in the 1950s when the Summer Games were there. It's been in America now for a couple of years. It's in Georgia and pretty much everywhere, and so many of you have tried it. I know it's huge in Athens. I'm happy to hear how much you all are loving it, and we're so happy to have the finished long drink as a part of Around the Dawghouse. So check out longdrink.com for a lot more on that. All right, so Kirby Smart this week did something he rarely does. He sort of played along with a bit in some respects. It's kind of funny. So we'll give this to you before we're done today. Kirby having some fun on the golf course himself here this week. We'll share that with you. We also have a tremendous golden shoe submission, very talented member of our audience. Kind of some funny stuff coming up for you on that. But for now, UGA recruiting talk, including some details on a 5-star. We'll get all of it to you here right now. It is Jeff Sentell on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A lot of information to cover with Jeff Sentell here. Always glad to have him on the program, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Jeff, let me start with something I guess that's sort of been in the works now for a while, but I guess officially official now. You know, we now know that Jeremiah Smith, the 5-star wide receiver, going to visit Georgia. We have the date for that official visit. I think I find myself asking some version of this question to you all the time. How real is this? I mean, clearly Smith's got a couple of visit plans in mind. I believe he's also going to be going to Florida at the very least. This is a guy that's been a part of that Ohio State class now for a pretty good bit. How open and available is Smith here for Georgia? The presence of Dylan Raiola potentially obviously has an impact on this too. What do you make of the overtures between UGA and Smith right now?
Morning, Brandon. I will. I'll just dispense pleasantries and say I think Smith only becomes real for Georgia with two factors. One, Dylan Raiola has to choose Georgia. Two, the second thing is I think Brian Hartline has to leave Ohio State. I think both of those things happen. It gets really real for someone to flip Jeremiah Smith. Of course, you know your favorite SEC East program to the south. They're trying as well. They've got a 5-star quarterback that they're trying to coax him. They're going to get a key official visit from him as well. One of the things I noticed, Brandon, is no matter how much he grandstands about, I'm talking about Jeremiah Smith here, how much he grandstands on social media about Ohio State adding more talented players to the class, he's still taking officials. He's still taking officials that I think have the ability to flip him in the right situation. I don't think the Georgia flip happens without the Dylan Raiola connection there. And really, if you want to, I know you love the reading between the tea leaves section. Maybe we should find a tea company sponsor for this on Fridays, Brandon. But I think what it should tell the very smart DawgNation reader is Jeremiah Smith's going to be in Athens next weekend for the scavenger hunt, and that's cool. But what it likely means is Raiola will also be there with him as well, because I don't know if that's the most effective official visit for Georgia. If not, if there is the potential connection synergy there with a potential 5-star quarterback commitment as well. That's like wide receivers and quarterbacks, they go hand in hand.
So if Raiola takes an unofficial visit just before taking an official visit, I'm not even sure he needs to announce a commitment at that point in time, Jeff.
That'd be pretty funny. We have different degrees of it every year, Brandon. I know you probably feel a little bit more comfortable when it's defensive ends and outside linebackers being the most committed, undecided recruit in the potential class rather than 5-star quarterbacks. But it kind of is what it is, man. Smith, Brandon, one thing I did this week on Before the Hedges is I kind of dabbled into theater a little bit, because I really think it's kind of like a Tetris. It's kind of like some math here. But, like, if the Raiola piece falls, then other pieces would fall. And very quickly, Brandon, Georgia could not only get to its best class of all time, which would surpass the 2018 class, but it would also be up there challenging some of the Alabamas and the Texas A&M classes of past years for that lofty 333.333, the wild, crazy threes. That's the all-time score that Texas A&M put up a couple of years ago, Brandon, when they had 18 players ranked inside the top 100. Now, we all know what that did for those Aggies out there, but that's still a heck of a recruiting feat. And you got to think if Georgia was to put up a number close to that, the evaluations for the players would definitely be a lot better.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about the going back to the Smith and the Ohio State thing for a moment. One of these is serious, one of these is less so. Here's the serious part. You know, Brian Hartline's had a little bit of a weird offseason, and obviously I've got great respect for him as a coach. I think he's, you know, one of the better assistant coaches in college football in terms of the recruiting acumen and what he means to Ohio State. Hartline's reputation's, you know, very well cemented. But he also had an ATV accident, you know, this offseason in which alcohol, seemingly he's admitted to drinking, may have played a factor in, you know, what led to some injuries there. Has that hurt him on the recruiting trail at all?
I don't think so, Brandon. I think it's still just the reputation of him pipelining incredible wide receivers to the first round. I mean, it's a really tough conversation if you have a Ohio State fan with you at a pub and you chat over a libation and you try to get them to name their top 5 Ohio State receivers of all time. Pretty complicated over the last 7 to 8 years with the amount of players that they've stacked up. I think, Brandon, it's kind of an eventuality. I think the way Dog fans look at Glenn Schumann and how great he is and how they're eventually likely to lose him to a head job somewhere at a big job, kind of like in that Kirby fashion. I think Ohio State fans have resigned themselves to that for a while. And quite frankly, you hear a lot of rumblings out of Columbus regarding Ryan Day. And, you know, if Michigan keeps ascending and they don't beat Michigan again for another year, it might just be that high pressure of a job for maybe Day to consider the NFL or somewhere else. It seems crazy to think about that a few years ago, but it is what it is. The realities of that job are very high pressure in college football.
And then on a less serious note, even if Jeremiah Smith doesn't come to Georgia, you know, Ohio State fans whine about everything. And up in the Big Ten, they just have a very different kind of attitude about committed players taking visits. Like down here, I feel like we have pretty thick skin about, you know, our favorite teams commits and somebody else's commits. It's all fair until everything's signed, right? I mean, this is a pretty sort of knockdown, drag-out part of the country when it comes to recruiting. Big Ten folks just have a little bit different viewpoint on this. How much do they hate Jeremiah Smith taking all these visits?
Well, they don't like it. I'd say that. Especially, it's just weird, Brandon. I want to make sure everybody knows the timeline here. So Raiola was committed to Ohio State for basically 6 months. He committed last year. Also, Dylan celebrated his 18th birthday last week as well. But he turned 17 last year, committed to Ohio State on his birthday, and then proceeded to be committed for about 6 months, all the way up to December. And one of the guys that he was closely recruiting was Jeremiah Smith. So there was a bond for him. There was a connection, kind of like that, hey, I'm going to throw about 30 balls your way for touchdowns or whatever. You know, that sort of kinship was established there. And then basically like a day or two before Smith even committed to Ohio State, Raiola did. And now it's kind of been like there's always – Brent, I'll never forget asking him. We were in a camp in Atlanta, 7-on-7 event that Jeremiah Smith absolutely destroyed. And I asked him, I said, hey, man, hot topic. Raiola goes to Georgia. What are the chances of that? What does that do for you? And we put this out on our socials. We shared it on Hedges. There was really a nod of the head and kind of an eyebrow-raising moment there for Jeremiah Smith because he knows the potential of what it would be, him and Raiola at a place like Georgia. And the fact that he continues to take the visit, the official visit coming in May is interesting, and not where earlier a lot of us thought that the official visit was going to come that first weekend in June when Raiola was expected to be there as well. So, I mean, that's just a lethal, potent combination, Brandon. And the thing we got to say is, I know we talk about five-star receivers every cycle. This young man is different. I mean, if we had to put together a list of the top wide receivers over the past 5 to 6 years, I think Jeremiah Smith might be second or third, maybe even first on a lot of ballots.
It's really interesting. I liked your story with Justin Green this morning, the 4-star defensive lineman at DawgNation.com. And I guess, Jeff, the thing that stood out to me the most is, and this is what I think people to understand, is we've seen a big change in Georgia in recent years. They've now won 2 straight national championships, a level of success the program wasn't enjoying prior to that. And a big change is possible because of little changes that occur. And to me, the Green story is a little bit of an example of that. Jeff, you don't have to go back that far in the past to see Georgia with a little bit of a defensive line drought when it came to the NFL draft. This program is not developing defensive linemen arguably the same way that we talked about Ohio State before. Ohio State had a much better track record than that for a while. Alabama had a much better track record than Georgia when it comes to developing defensive linemen for a while. Well, that ain't true no more, to use bad grammar intentionally. And guys like Justin Green, they just sort of noticed that. And so, Jeff, I mean, I hope that Green comes to Georgia. I think it'd be a great thing if he did. But to me, the Green story, and when he says, hey, no, it's the way these defensive linemen get developed, and I know he's not the only prospect that sort of told you that this week, but when you hear these guys kind of looking at that track record, to me, that's one of the examples of little things that change for big success to be possible. The fact there are many proofs of concept for terrific defensive linemen on their way to the first round of the NFL draft. This is just the new Georgia in so many ways, and I'm glad that recruits are sitting up and taking notice of it.
I feel like, Brandon, it is the ultimate reality because not only, I mean, let's face it, man, when we started writing and working and talking for DawgNation.com years ago, the grandeur, and I guess I'll use that word, of Georgia not only having the peak NFL development in the country, the peak recruiting classes in the country, Alabama's in that conversation still, but also winning the championships. I didn't know if all this was possible, to have all three of those things kind of in line there. And you're right, Brandon, it is the defensive line track record. It starts, begins, and ends with Georgia, to the point where, I mean, the one thing I liked about the Justin Green story, and especially folks will kind of pay a lot more attention to defensive line recruiting, Brandon, I hope you are, because I think they're going to lose 4 or 5 guys off this year's team to the NFL. That's a good thing. That's more track record. That's more development. But then you look at the guys underneath, and, yeah, there's Christian Miller there. There's Jamal Jarrett there. There's Jordan Big Baby Hall there. But, like, some of that championship NFL depth, the Barry Alexander, the Shone Washington, you know, those guys were needed in that 2022 class to kind of fill that gap between Zion Logue, Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse, maybe even a guy like Tyrion Ingram Dawkins that I think will really break out this year, who looked really good this spring. And they have to get it right in 2024 with defensive linemen, not the starters per se, but getting those guys that are going to kind of fill those roles. Because remember, Georgia rotates its defensive linemen, 6, 7, 8 guys a game. That's what they want. That's part of the Georgia way. And I think it's interesting with Green because Green is a high-character kid. He's smart. He's a technician. If you see in that story, the thing that struck me was how he rebuilt his body, and he put on 45 pounds of armor to a 212-pound frame and turned himself from an ACC-level prospect into a SEC can-go-anywhere prospect. And Georgia was in on him late because they didn't know because that Justin Green, and he readily admits it, that Justin Green wasn't going to go to Georgia. He wasn't a Georgia guy until he changed his body. He put on, 30 pounds for his junior year. He was about 245, and then he put on another 15 pounds now for his senior year. He's maybe 260, 265. Now he looks like a guy, and Trey Scott was like, man, you were just a little lighter. And what Georgia was able to do with that track record, Brandon, is play from behind. Alabama and South Carolina, part of his Final Four, they were there. They were holding on. They were recruiting him hard back when he was 240, 245 as a junior, and Georgia just jumped into the fray, and they're right now in the thick of it. He told me that it was a 4-way tie basically right now for his decision, and the visits will settle that. But the one thing about the tea leaves, since we're on that subject today, the tea leaves for me told me one important thing. Is he said, I trust Georgia with its development and the way they developed me to get me to the NFL. He believes in that track record, and that's something for an in-state prospect that Georgia now really wants that I think is substantial.
Really, really interesting. And let me change the subject here. ESPN.com this week took a little bit of a closer look at Julian Juju Lewis, quarterback at Carrollton, 2026 prospect. You see hype from ESPN here on this, obviously other places there as well. Is there any doubt in your mind, even for as many talented seniors as there are in the state right now, that Lewis is going to end up being the most talked about player in the state of Georgia this year and probably the most talked about prospect in Georgia since like Trevor Lawrence? No coincidence, I guess, that Lawrence was coached by Joey King. So is Juju Lewis as well. that Lewis is just a pretty rare prospect, it seems like, the rising sophomore quarterback for the Carrollton Trojans.
Very real deal, Brandon. I mean, one of the things that I want to make sure I reference that story so everybody can get the proper context. Brandon, ESPN did a really first original thing in years, I think, with their recruiting coverage, is they had a fabulous idea. They ranked every player in the nation, the rising sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and they said, okay, who are the really 2025 best players in high school football, the best prospects in high school football? Brandon, I think Ellis Robinson made the top 10, the 5-star cornerback commitment to Georgia. Dylan Raiola was 4th. There was another 2025 quarterback that was 2nd. And then number 1 was Julian Juju Lewis. And I'll say it again, he's the real absolute deal. I think the Juju Lewis recruitment, he will be, I said this at the end of his freshman year. I said he will be the cover boy for Georgia high school football for the next 3 years. The talent is there, the way he did it. He's got the tutelage of Joey King. With him at Carrollton, they have all the resources in the world at Carrollton. And I think he's going to be kind of a stress point for a lot of things. It's going to be a stress point for NIL in high school. I think Georgia's laws might have to change for high school NIL if Julian Juju Lewis stays in Georgia for the balance of his high school career. It has to resemble some of the other states. The other thing is I think that his ability, we've heard rumors that he wanted to reclassify up because he was probably that ready to play college football. And I spoke to him about that this winter, and he really liked where he was at. He wanted to play his entire high school career. But this is a guy, Brandon, that everybody already loves him, stamps him. What he did in Georgia high school 7A football last year was astounding. And I think the thing with him, Brandon, he's only 6'2", maybe 6'2", stretched out. Maybe only gets to 6'3" or so. But what he has is that elite processing. He has that elite accuracy where I think the taller Bryce Young comparisons, I know everybody loves the comparison games. Analysts like me don't like it because I think he's a little different than Bryce Young. But when I say taller Bryce Young, it's some of the same notes he's going to hit. It's going to be processing. It's going to be smart. It's going to be getting the ball out. And not only is he accurate, Brandon, but you look at him, you watch him with his reads. He is about a half second or maybe a third of a second faster with where he wants to go with his read, and then the release, and then getting the ball out quick, the delivery, the mechanics of getting it there. I mean, what this young man does in the accuracy department, I think, is almost unparalleled in high school football.
Would you agree, though, that probably not moving around quite like Bryce Young, at least when I saw him, and you're obviously evaluating these guys more closely than I am, but when I saw him, I saw what you said right there, decision maker, a guy that's sort of processing everything on the field. But this is someone who I would sort of put more in the category of a true pocket passer as opposed to a guy like Bryce Young, who's probably keeping more plays alive with his legs. Is that the evaluation that you would make too?
Yeah, I think so, especially right now. But also, when you're a franchise like that already in high school ball, probably don't need to use those legs as much as you possibly could. I don't think. I can say it this way, Brandon. I think if Julian Juju Lewis goes to a camp and runs a 5.3, no one is going to care whatsoever. Yeah. That's how talented he is with his eyes and with his brain and with that arm.
All right, let's finish with this. It was kind of a hot topic this week, at least briefly, the fact that Georgia's not going to go to the White House, late invitation to attend with like a bunch of other, college teams in June, maybe not befitting a two-time national champion in the marquee sport for college athletics. But nonetheless, Georgia not going to the White House. And obviously, we talk about the month of June all the time because of official visits. And I believe, maybe you'll correct me on this, I believe the date that was proposed was the date of the KJ Bolden official visit, to give you an idea of just how serious that time of year is for Georgia. Jeff, how much would a White House visit at that time have impacted a recruiting calendar for Georgia during a month that's become the single most important month for recruiting for all of college football?
Yeah, I think my view on that story, Brandon, is, and I think the date was proposed was June 12th. Is that right?
I believe so.
Yeah, so that would be the Monday after the huge visit weekend with KJ Bolden, Sammy Brown, a lot of others. In some respects, Brandon, second weekend in June is getting pretty close and creeping into the same zip code as that first weekend of stacked Oscar night, Oscar weekend official visits for Georgia with all the red carpet. I guess my view of this is, Georgia's always going to recruit because it wouldn't so much have been an official visit weekend, but it would have been an evaluation day when Georgia's holding its camp.
Okay.
That's really vital, where Georgia takes perhaps the top 15 defensive linemen it likes and the top 15 offensive linemen it likes, and they have them do battle, they have them go at it, they have them compete, and then the ones that rise to the top are the ones that get the committable offers and said, hey, man, we're ready to commit. We're ready. We'll take your commitment at any time. You proved it. I think those are still so important for Georgia. I just wish, and here's the take, I just wish things could have been done differently. I think Georgia should have done that better. I think, the White House should have done that better. I think the optics here look bad because not only is the timing off, but it was also a two-time national champion where Georgia didn't make the one the year previously, where, as I understand, the White House wasn't opening up at that time due to certain areas, but still because of worries and fears about the global health scare or whatever you might want to say, that they weren't entertaining national champion visits anymore. But I just think it could have been worked out so much better. And there was a way that Georgia could do it where Georgia could preserve its recruiting. Perhaps you could send a lot of Georgia's graduating seniors or some of Georgia's, a contingent of Georgia's NFL players that would have that free time in June to get not like the entire team, but a strong representation of about 20 dogs, administrators, assistants, and what have you. I think that could have been done differently on both ends.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of half jokingly thought they should take the recruits to the White House. I mean, now I'm sure the recruits are like the security clearance to get in there is probably onerous. I'm sure the recruits don't want to go either. But I did sort of think that would be kind of the one thing that Georgia could offer that nobody else could offer, is they could take a bunch of recruits to the White House. Yeah, that might be the kind of sort of recruiting official visit thing that, fly private, go up, see the White House, come back home. That's the one thing that Georgia could offer that nobody else could offer. Maybe they should have considered that.
Maybe they should have put a simulcast or whatever, or FaceTime from the White House so the kids could see it. But I think there's an NCAA bylaw, Brandon, somewhere tucked in there that you can't transport them more than 30 miles off.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
For entertainment. I've got to act like I know my NCAA nerd rule book here. It comes with my occupation. But there's a lot of rules in the deep dive of the official visit manual. I think that's one of them.
Okay.
I just wish, you know what, and I'm going to say something that's going to sound like placating, or that's going to sound like exactly playing to the chorus of what you want to hear, Brandon. But I think there'll be plenty of other times for White House visits in the future for Georgia to get it right.
No, I think you're exactly right about that. Jeff, great stuff. We appreciate you being here as a part of our program today. Always good to get good recruiting information from you. Hope you have a great weekend. Certainly wish, happy Mother's Day to your lovely wife, and we will look forward to talking to you soon.
Hey, man, same to you and yours. Happy Mother's Day, everybody.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So let me say a couple things on the White House deal, and then after this, I probably don't think we need to talk about this much anymore at all. A couple quick things here for a moment. So on this show, obviously, we make it very, very, very serious, not talk about politics at all, because that's not what you come to this show for. We respect you enough to kind of give you the content that you expect. We don't want to try to force feed anything else that you didn't want. That's just something I take very seriously. But while I don't talk about politics on this show at all, I will confess something to you. I do follow politics pretty closely. I consume a lot of political media. I really do. It's just something I'm interested in. And so I just do that. Here's what I can tell you. In the sort of political world, no one's talking about this at all. It's just not a thing. So for anybody who was worried that, it's a misstep by Georgia to decline an invitation to the White House, no, it's not. Nobody cares. You had a couple of people make a statement the moment it happened, but people are always making statements about everything. This has not had any staying power within the political media whatsoever. This just isn't a thing. I don't talk about politics because that's not what you want, but I do follow politics, and nobody cares about this. This is not a thing. And also, to kind of piggyback on Jeff's prediction, Jeff says they're going to have more chance to go to the White House, basically meaning more national championships. I'll make an additional prediction on top of that. Georgia will be invited to go to the White House next January. I mean, now I'm assuming they win the national championship, but the point is that the error of inviting them in May to come stand with like the Cornell field hockey team, that error will be corrected, and Georgia will be invited to go to the White House next January. They will get the invitation in a timely manner to be there when they should be there in January. That's the way this will play out next year. That's my prediction on all of that. All right, with that said, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Happy to have them as a part of what we do here. And listen, you can feel the summer in the air, which makes me want to be in the Caribbean. There's really actually nothing that doesn't make me want to be in the Caribbean. When the weather's nice here, it makes me think about the Caribbean. When the weather's bad here, it makes me wish I was in the Caribbean. It's not that hard to get me thinking about the Caribbean. So from that standpoint, we love our friends at Royal Caribbean because really nobody provides that better than they do. Because, as I've told you before, the thing that sets Royal Caribbean apart, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think could potentially be the answer to this. But to me, the ultimate differentiator, use a bigger word than I should, the ultimate differentiator for what makes Royal Caribbean is Perfect Day Coco Cay, that private island right there in the Bahamas that's unlike anything you're going to get anywhere else. A lot of pretenders, but no actual contender when it comes to the great private island experience that Perfect Day Coco Cay offers. I love it. Every Royal Caribbean cruise vacation search that I start begins with, who is going to Perfect Day Coco Cay? It begins and it ends with that. I just love it that much. So, listen, you can do what you want, obviously, but my suggestion to you is, as you're looking for your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, start with Perfect Day Coco Cay. Ask anybody who was on the DawgNation cruise. They will tell you. It is just such a fun time. We had a great time this past April there. And you'll have the same thing. You get the thrill side, you get the chill side. You want the thrill side with the water park and the tallest water slide in North America. Largest wave pool in the Bahamas. You want all of that. You got so many great things going on there on that side. Then you got the chill side with the Oasis Lagoon, this incredible pool. You got the DJ playing. You got some fun stuff going on with that. Obviously, just the regular beach stuff there too. One of the things I like to do is I like to get a mat and sort of float in the water. There's amazing snorkeling opportunities there too. I go out and snorkel with my kids. There's like a shipwreck thing you go out and see. Like, there's just some really great stuff. It's just a great thing. And Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. She can help you get it booked up. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. Terrific travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. Give her a call, 770-718-9147, and she will help you out with all that today. All right, so I talked off the top of the program, quarterbacks as evaluated by ESPN. I want to give you a couple of other notes that ESPN highlighted in their story here, because I think there are a couple of things quarterback-wise that are kind of pretty interesting here. And it's also kind of amazing to me how sometimes wrong I get it when it comes to the quarterback situation. I'll give you an example of one that I think I probably got wrong. At Ole Miss, I thought that Spencer Sanders was brought in to win that quarterback job. As of right now, I don't think that's the case. It looks like last year started Jackson Dart, who was not great, to be honest with you. It looks like Dart may still be in line to be the starter there in Oxford. That matters to Georgia fans because Georgia plays Ole Miss a little bit later on. This is one of those things I just sort of get wrong from time to time. I think of all the teams that have open quarterback situations, and for now at least you'll count Georgia in that, I think the team that comes the closest to being like Georgia, which is essentially settled, even if not officially named as so, is probably Ohio State. Don't you get the sense that Kyle McCord, for those of you who've been following this, don't you get the sense that Kyle McCord's likely to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State? Could be wrong about that, but I sort of get the sense there on that. Like at a place like Alabama, as a for instance, I don't think we had any idea there on that. Tyler Buckner, was he brought in to win? Maybe so, but I mean, this is a guy who was maybe going to be third-string quarterback had he stayed at Notre Dame. It seems like, if you watch the Alabama spring game, you don't really know what Milroe or Ty Simpson have to offer right now. I'd say the Alabama quarterback situation is as murky as ever. The Florida quarterback situation gets mentioned here by ESPN.com there as well. And I think what you look at with Florida is, let's be honest, Jack Miller nor Graham Mertz, neither one of those are particularly impressive prospects whatsoever. Mertz may be the better of the two, but that's not saying much. However, even a Gator hater like me can admit that when you look ahead to the class of 2024, you do see a pretty, promising prospect in DJ Lagway coming in. Right now, this is the best thing that Billy Napier has going for him, is that Napier is sort of viewed to be a good recruiter of quarterbacks. Lagway may be the best example of that. So we always talk about how you've got to have some sort of evidence in your early days that you have a chance to be a successful coach. Well, Napier's only evidence right now is the commitment of DJ Lagway, who's coming in next year. So I guess the thing that Napier's got to find some way to do is to be good enough with the quarterbacks you have right now in order to make the Lagway arrival really matter. Because if you don't get something out of, let's say Graham Mertz at the start, if you don't get something out of Mertz, then, I'm not even quite so sure that DJ Lagway's got much to enjoy once he gets it. This is an important year for Billy Napier. It really is. I don't think he gets fired one way or another. I don't. Going to have to buy himself more time than that probably at Florida. But you got to show something. You got to have something to show. And, navigating the transfer portal is tricky, but you got to do better. And, NIL stuff is weird, but, the Jalen Rashada thing notwithstanding, you got to do better. I mean, you just have to, if you want to be a coach in the SEC, if you want to kind of arrive at that next level, above that Sun Belt level, you got to have some wins. You got to have some success. And we'll see if they're able to do that. I think the Tennessee thing between Joe Milton and Nico Imaleva is kind of interesting. Milton's one of those guys that you could see him being in the same category of draft prospect that a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson was this past year, or just a few weeks ago, on the basis of the fact that Milton's got an unbelievably strong throwing arm. But he's also had chances to emerge as a starting quarterback both at Michigan and at Tennessee. Hasn't really happened for him in the past. So maybe all of this has sort of built to this moment. Maybe he's ready to be the guy. If not, then Nico Imaleva and this gigantic rumored NIL deal around him will be, I guess, waiting in the wings. The Tennessee situation could be very interesting, especially with Georgia seeing that team late in the year. You kind of wonder if you were to take bets, assuming that there's no injury situation, is it more likely Milton? Is it more likely Nico? I think different Georgia fans may have different opinions on that. I'll also say one more thing here, too, just for a minute. The Texas situation gets mentioned. You've heard me say before, I think one of the real stories of the offseason has been the seeming emergence of Quinn Ewers, who I think rightly is viewed right now as one of the best quarterbacks in college football. And I realize that kind of conjures up a bunch of Texas is back jokes, and I'm not trying to veer in that territory, but I would show some respect for Ewers. He won that quarterback competition this offseason commandingly, convincingly, and that probably says something a little bit there. The other thing about the Texas situation is it sort of seems like there's a chance that Arch Manning actually may be the number 3 quarterback there. Very, very quietly, a guy named Malik Murphy had a very good spring for Texas, and the word on the street is there were a lot of teams that reached out to Murphy to see if he wanted to leave and come be starting quarterback somewhere else, and Murphy chose to stay at Texas. So it's an example of something that's been a little bit of a trend around college football so far this spring, summer, which is a lot of quarterbacks that could have transferred. They just didn't. So for all the talk of the transfer portal, I would say that this year the hottest talk related to the portal is quarterbacks who did not leave. There were not a lot of kingmaker quarterbacks going to some program and immediately making that program a championship contender, or at least solidifying those programs as championship contenders. You just didn't have that. And on the list of quarterbacks that didn't transfer, I think you need to make some room for Malik Murphy from Texas, because it sounds like he could have, content to stay a backup at Texas for now. I was going to do a thing from CBS on quarterbacks. I've kind of gone long on this. Let me just save that for tomorrow. And for now, we'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Instead, here on the program, let me do this here for a moment. So we gave you some audio earlier, Kirby Smart, this week at an event called the Regions. It's basically like the Regions Tradition. It's a PGA Tour Champions event that takes place in Birmingham each year. It's a major for the Senior Tour, if you care about that. But it's also they have the Pro-Am tournament at the beginning of the week where a lot of the coaches kind of play in that. We gave you some audio of Kirby from that event being interviewed by WJOX. But there's also kind of a cool moment that the PGA Tour Champions Twitter feed shared this week too, of Kirby being kind of halfway interviewed by Jim Furyk, who's going to be the captain for the President's Cup coming up this fall. And they had kind of a funny exchange. And it's not often that Kirby Smart sort of plays along with a little bit of a comedic bit. But in this particular interview that he does, I'm going to give this to you. Furyk talking about Kirby being a great coach and maybe also helping him be a leader for the President's Cup team. This is good stuff from Jim Furyk and Kirby Smart. Take a listen to this.
Two-time national champions. How long you were, remind me, you were 5-6 years at Georgia before you won your first national championship?
That's right, 6 years.
6 years. All right, so 6 years of work, you're chasing people. You were hunting at that point, right?
That's right.
Aggressive. But now you win 2 national championships, everyone's coming after you, right? Everyone's coming after you. So what's the mentality?
The mentality is stay aggressive, stay on top, play from a position of strength, and I think you know something about that, picking your team, and being a coach here soon, we'll be pulling for you, and I'm excited to watch the team that you have, and
I appreciate it.
And tell them full throttle.
I don't know if I've got to recruit, but I guess it's kind of like being at Georgia. I have to recruit the same way Georgia. Everyone wants to come play for Kirby at Georgia, right? So everyone wants to be on the President's Cup team, right? So, but you got any recruiting tips?
I think you've got enough talent in the pool that you'll be fine. If you need any pregame speeches the day before, the night before, fly me in. As long as you don't mind a few expletives, I can help you.
Well, that's all right. I think that's great. Yeah, and we'll be in Montreal. You have no problem going to Montreal?
No problem.
You got any French expletives? You know how to do that?
I can do that. I can do that.
No.
Go Dogs.
Appreciate it. Go Dogs. That's right.
First of all, for those of you watching that video, how much would you love to have one of those Georgia Golf visors like Kirby's wearing? That looks amazing. The Georgia Golf logo is a great logo. Great to see Kirby sporting that, and also kind of playing along with the comedic bit of going up to Montreal for the President's Cup and giving one of those classic pregame speeches, which kind of gives us an excuse to kind of re-rack something we've done before. Kirby from the Florida game in 2021, obviously too profane to play on a family-oriented show like this. I had my own personal twist on that to make it a little bit more palatable for the air. This is an example of maybe that fiery pregame speech that Kirby could give the President's Cup team. See if you think this would work.
You know what, guys?
Flipping. Flipping.
Here we do it how we play. It's 0 to
Flipping.
0, and you make them never want to play again. Don't say
Stop.
They're undisciplined.
Behinds.
We are disciplined. Physically, I want to break them. I'm talking about
Flipping.
breaking
Gentlemen.
on defense and offense.
Would that work for the President's Cup team? I don't think it would hurt. I certainly don't. So maybe we'll get a chance to see Kirby Smart doing that later on this fall. Very, very fun stuff and funny stuff with Kirby and Jim Furyk there. That's great to see. All right, before we get ready to wrap up today, a little bit of a backstory for our golden shoe. So a couple of, I guess, weeks ago, maybe it was a few weeks ago, one of the very talented members of our audience, his name is Joel Sidney Kelly, does a lot of really good edits on social media and things like that. He sent me something as a golden shoe submission. I wasn't able to play it because it had some commercial music. You know, Big Tech has its overlords out there, and they're always looking to jump on us if we ever play like commercial music or anything like that. We just can't do that. And so I wasn't able to play this. And so he made another video that he wanted to share that said did not have any kind of commercial overture to it, so wouldn't have any issue with this. It's making fun of Tennessee fans, kind of a look at the ups and downs of the Vols' recent season. As a golden shoe today, I want to give this to you. Now, if you're listening, this is kind of mostly kind of a video thing, so I'll describe it to you after it's done. But here's a great golden shoe from our friend Joel Sidney Kelly looking at kind of the wild ride for Tennessee fans, the happiness of beating Alabama, and the sadness that came after that. Take a look at this.
One week later.
So very, very funny there of the Tennessee fans. They're so happy about beating Alabama. They've written books about it. They continue to tell stories of what it was like to be in Knoxville that day when Tennessee fans finally beat the Crimson Tide, tore down the goalposts, and then in odd fashion decided to pollute the Tennessee River by throwing the goalpost into the river. I'll never understand the logic behind that, why they would throw the goalpost into the Tennessee River, but I guess more pollution for that body of water. And then only to see the celebration very, very quickly upended by the embarrassing loss to Georgia. So very funny stuff from Joel Sidney Kelly. We will give him a golden shoe for that, and we'll wrap up today's show as well. So obviously Vols fans would love to return the favor to Georgia here this year. We don't believe that's going to happen, though. In fact, we think that Tennessee's number one job is to make the Georgia-Tennessee game in November even relevant. That Vols fans may have the Georgia game circled, but they better watch out for a lot of the games they have on their schedule prior to that. We think that Georgia's going to be undefeated going into November. Tennessee, we're not quite so sure of. So, as we said before, Joe Milton, Nico Imaleva, quarterback competition. We'll see how that plays out. Josh Heupel said they expect to play elite defense. We'll see if that expectation has any plans of coming true. And then we'll see how much the Georgia-Tennessee game matters once you get there. Prior to that, Georgia got another rivalry game to think about, and that's the game against those lousy, stinking Gators. We believe a good Georgia fan's a Gator-hater first and foremost, and we believe 169 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville beating up on Florida. We call this our Gator-hater countdown. We do it every day. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Keep you nice and cool here this summer. We're happy about all of that. I'm going to go on Facebook first today. Haven't done that in a little while. We'll take a few comments across all of our platforms, and then we'll get ready to get a terrific weekend started. And of course, all of you are getting ready to enjoy a happy weekend and happy Mother's Day and everything else. All right, let's see what's going on over here on Facebook. Yeah, Joseph Kennedy kind of making fun of those Tennessee fans. I'll never understand that, Joseph. Like, what's the deal? Like, first of all, the goalpost you would think would be some sort of, thing you'd want to collect, right? Goodness knows, given the fact they try to sell books about the game, chop it up, put it in little slivers and just sort of sell it to people if nothing else. Like, don't go dump it into the river. That's your river. Seems like an odd thing to do. Joel Moody says, big recruiting weekends for Georgia coming up in June. Dog's going to rise number 1 in July and stay there. That's good to think about for sure. Jacob O'Neill says, Tennessee beat Bama. We beat Tennessee. That means we would have walked the dog on Bama. You can't argue with that logic, Jacob. Appreciate that. Susan Kornblut, thank you for being a part of our show today, and thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is going on over here. Gerald Harmon, good to see you checking in. Wendell Brewer wants to dominate the Gators always. Wendell, I like that. Appreciate that. Gerald Harmon laughing at my G-rated version of the speech. Yeah, we did that a few, what is that? I guess a couple of years ago. We've still had some fun with that. Brandon Griffin, thanks for checking in. Glad to have you here. Ken Holcomb says that was my favorite golden shoe. Oh, that's good. Ken, I'm glad about that. Yeah, glad to see y'all having some fun with that. William Camacho now pointing us out that there are 103 days to week 0. Yeah, so we're coming up on 100 days to the start of the season. That's always one of those important kind of, corner poles you got to turn your way around to get ready for the season. So good stuff coming there on that. That was great. That's great. All right, we'll come back over to Facebook here in a minute. A lot of folks sharing some happy Mother's Day wishes. Bill Sanders questioning the intelligence of Tennessee fans. It's probably kind of a wise thing to do there, too. DT says I did a very good job cleaning up the Kirby audio. I'm glad to know that folks like that. Yeah, that's kind of a blast in the past. That's the one we've done before. Anytime we have a chance to re-rack something like that is great. John Carter says visiting the White House is an event of a lifetime. Finishing a three-peat in college football is a once in 150-year event, basically meaning that's even more than a lifetime accomplishment. John, you may be right about that. DT says, I think that Georgia and Kirby played the hand they were dealt regarding the White House. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think this is a political point to make, but the invitation should have come sooner. Previous national champions, back when the national champions were visiting the White House, those visits took place in January. LSU after the 2019 season, Clemson in the 2018 season, those took place in January just after the season ended. You watch and see. Georgia will be there next January. I'm not even saying that because they win the national championship. And obviously they're the favorite to win the national championship. I'm not saying this to say they're definitely win the national championship. What I'm saying is if they do win the national championship, they will definitely be invited to go there in January. You watch and see. You watch and see. The error here was on the part of the White House. DT also having some fun with my flour or nut thing when it comes to the Buckeye, but also kind of mentioning the WHINE version of wine, which is very funny too. Let's see what else. DT says the hardest part of the show, this is going back to 10 a.m. when we first got started, is when I have to be quiet to bring on the rest of our video audience. Yeah, not hard, not easy for me to be quiet, for sure about that. Not easy for me to be quiet. No doubt about that. All right, let me go to YouTube, see what they're doing over there. Darian Ford says, personally, with the world seemingly, all kinds of stuff going on, I'm not defending the invitation, just game. Yeah, I'm not really offended by it. I really think it's just sort of a non-thing. It's like, the running the country is very, very time-consuming, we would assume, right? So that's totally fine, although the person that's in charge of making these invitations not exactly sitting in the White House Situation Room, you'd probably think. But nonetheless, I'm not offended by it that the invitation just came. I mean, I think there was also some back channel stuff that didn't quite produce a result either. This is the thing that I think is also probably true about this as well. If the Georgia players wanted to go, Georgia would be going. If Nolan Smith, I don't want to even mention anybody by name. Like if the key important leaders and players in this team were like chomping at the bit to go through, invasive security clearance and, put on a suit and tie, fly to Washington, stand there cheesing for a photograph. If they wanted to do that, they would be doing it. Now, if I was invited to the White House, I don't care who the president was, boom, I'd be there 5 seconds. It'd be one of the coolest things I could probably ever do in my lifetime. Absolutely it would be. I don't know that everybody else feels that way. Let's see what else. Jay Shipes on the subject of quarterback signing NDAs. I don't know about that, Jay. Darian Ford also enjoyed the edit on the Kirby speech. I'm glad. Yeah, it's a little bit of a blast from the past. That's one we played a couple times before, but people. By the way, that's why we sometimes play things more than once, is because people, sort of find it for the first time oftentimes. Nature Gator says Florida is the top public university in the SEC, top 5 in the country. Well, Nature, you can enjoy reading that in U.S. News and World Report while Georgia's playing for the national championship. You can just sit there and just bathe in the academic credentials. Let's see what else. Kenneth, hold on. I'm not going down that road, Kenneth. I'm not going down that road. But I know what you're talking about. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, you call yourself a carnival barker. What ride are you standing in front of, or is the freak show that you're barking for? Yeah, I'm sort of more along the lines of like the, P.T. Barnum style. Hey, come inside, take a look at this, take a look at that. That's a little bit more along the lines of what I am, I guess. For sure. Reggie Fly says, am I concerned about defensive line recruiting for 2024? I guess not yet. Maybe I should be. I guess not yet. I sort of feel like I guess I sort of have a hard time getting massively concerned about anything as it stands right now. I mean, clearly you got to have elite players. So let's see how this kind of comes together here. I mean, right now it seems like they got a pretty good bit of depth in the program already. Scott Green also weighing on the same subject there as well. Listen, like I'm just the kind of person, like I said, I consume a lot of political media. I don't talk about any of it. I consume a lot of it. I don't even talk about it in my private life very much. It's one of those things of like the last thing the world needs is one more person going around telling everybody what they think about politics. I feel like one less person, vomiting out a bunch of political opinions is probably, a pretty good thing in life. So even in my private life, I don't walk around talking politics all that much. But as somebody who like grew up on, I just think, I just think Washington, D.C. is kind of a cool city to visit. I like all the monuments. I like all that kind of stuff. I like, classical architecture. I sort of think that, I think that government buildings ought to look like government buildings. I like classical architecture. So if I got invited to the White House, boom, I'd be there. And Scott says he would be too. See, this is why we can't have nice things. Some of y'all are trying to turn this into something it's not. I can't read some of these. Let's see what else. I'm glad to see that Nature and I agree on something. That's good to know. Christopher Vale says Kirby values sacks less than a quarterback making a rush, inaccurate throw into a secondary with great closing speed. Yeah, this is one of those things where I always sort of feel foolish, Christopher, because, like some of the stuff that Kirby has said about the idea of pass rush, things like that, including, by the way, even to a question that I asked him, last August maybe it was, I just kind of don't agree with. But I also acknowledge that Kirby knows literally infinitely more about football than I do. So if he thinks it and I think it, whatever, if we're on different sides and he's clearly far more likely to be right than me, I totally acknowledge all of that. But I'm a big believer that, that if your pass pressure is relentless enough that the sack's going to come, that you don't have to actually choose between sacks and sort of percentage of pass pressure, plays, that if your percentage of plays that result in some pass pressure is high enough that you're going to get sacks to kind of come along with that. And what I really believe about Georgia in 2023 is when you look at the talent they could have at edge rusher spot, some of the defensive line stuff, that you could actually see Georgia kind of look a little bit more like it did in 2021 when it had, 49 sacks, I think it was in the full season there. I think it's actually pretty remarkable that Georgia won the national championship with as few sacks as it had. Now, the caveat to that is that for whatever reason, Georgia just sort of played pretty well pass rush in its biggest games. Clearly against Tennessee, I think they sacked Hooker, 8 times that day? So they had a massive pass rush when they really needed it. Even against Ohio State, you go back and watch, and we did rewatch this game with some of the folks in the DawgNation crews the other day. Georgia, I think, had 4 sacks against Ohio State. Those were well-placed sacks in moments that really mattered. In other words, I'm a big believer that sacks matter. The fact that Georgia had so few of them this year, maybe that's an argument against the point that I'm making, and that's why Kirby Smart knows more about this than I do. But nonetheless, my opinion is my opinion. Darian Ford says, I've sold all my A&M stock. So the honest truth is, and for those of you, we always have new folks kind of checking in. So a couple of years, I really kind of talked up Texas A&M. Watch out for A&M. Watch out for Jimbo Fisher. I really was of the belief that Jimbo Fisher was a good coach. I have clearly had to reconsider some of the thoughts that I've had on Jimbo Fisher. Let me be very, very honest with you, though. Part of me does think that this might finally be an improved Texas A&M team, because the one thing that I think that Jimbo has brought to A&M is he has brought a little bit more toughness on the defensive side. Now, some of that was Mike Elko, and Elko is now the head coach at Duke. They've run the ball a little bit better. They're a more physical team than they were when Kevin Sumlin was there. There was a lot of Big 12 stench kind of still on A&M for a long time. And I think that Jimbo Fisher's kind of changed some of that. And I think that changing from finesse to physical is always kind of a hard thing. I think that Jimbo's done some of that. Jimbo Fisher's just not a very good offensive coach. And I just think the proof is in the pudding on that. So now Bobby Petrino's been hired as offensive coordinator. And assuming that Petrino is kind of, as the meme says, assuming they let Petrino cook, I think there's a chance A&M could be improved. But I'm also self-aware enough to know that I have zero credibility with any of y'all to say stuff like that. Zero credibility to say any of that with any of y'all. So, because I've been so wrong before. So this is an example of some actually rare humility for me. Maybe I should be more humble on a more regular basis. But while I believe that, A&M, could A&M be the 5th best team in the SEC? Could be the 4th best team in the SEC. You'd say in some order, obviously Georgia 1, Alabama or LSU 2, 3. Could A&M be better than Tennessee, be the 4th best team in the SEC? I think there's a chance they could be, but I'm not going to come on here and tell you all that after as wrong as I've been about that. By the way, I just got a good text from our good friend Kaylee Mansell, which reminds me of something I meant to say anyway. Today, Kaylee Mansell gets ready to celebrate her graduation. She is graduating from college today. We are so happy to have her on the team here at DawgNation and happy to celebrate her graduation with her there as well. So Kaylee Mansell joins the ranks of the college graduates here after today, and we are super happy about that. Kirby's Belt says, talk about the lawsuit. So I mentioned this a little bit yesterday. This is not court TV. We're not going to break down every dot and tittle of the legal proceeding because, A, I'm not an expert enough to do that, and B, I just don't think that's what people want. So this is going to play itself out. It was sort of always destined to head in this direction. We knew that. This was obvious from the word go. And how it gets resolved from here is frankly going to be, very sort of legalese type stuff, which means tedious, and tedious means boring. So we don't do boring, so we're not going to do this. Everybody's got a right to kind of pursue legally everything that, the court provides for, and this is an example of that, but I don't have much in the way of opinion to offer on that other than the fact that this was just always the way it's going to go. JG says, how do we send you a video? If you go to the Facebook page and upload it there, you can send it to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. And if you send it to Facebook, I won't get it directly, but somebody will eventually get it to me. Or you can hit me up on Twitter for it. That'd be a good way. A link's the best thing. We just got to be careful about what we play because big tech is always looking at us. Andrew Hughes says people are saying that people here think that Raiola would start over Beck if he commits. Please tell them they are wrong. I mean, listen, I'm a respecter of experience when it comes to that. I think that Beck's experience is a real weapon right now. Now, if you're going to turn this into, well, how good of a prospect is Raiola really? I'm led to believe he's a very good prospect. I'm led to believe he's a better prospect this year than Arch Manning was a year ago. Now, there's also the non-Georgia fan or just kind of the skeptical person who's like, well, of course that's what people would say because that's the way this stuff goes. The next guy is always hyped more than the previous guy. And maybe that's the case. But I'm led to believe that Dylan Raiola is a real deal prospect. I really am. I don't consider myself a scout. I don't try to put the whole scouting thing, out there. Like I said about Juju Lewis, this is not a scouting report. When I saw him, he didn't really run. That's not a scouting report. That's just an eyewitness account, right? So, I'll tell you stuff like that I see from guys, but I don't play the scouting game. I just don't. I've never really needed to, right? We've had a successful show with me just sort of being me. No reason to try to be something that I'm not. But as far as how good a prospect that Raiola is, people who are scouts tell me very, 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 very good. But, y'all, experience is tough to beat out. And here's the other thing, too. So let's say that Raiola comes to Georgia. I don't want to make any kind of statement about what he would do, but let me tell you what I believe that I notice. In the NIL age in which we live, I think you may see more quarterbacks content to sit than would have ever been content to do so before. We can go back 2018. Let's just be honest. Justin Fields was miserable. We have evidence of that from the beginning of the season. Fields did not feel like he was playing enough. Miserable. I don't know that current quarterbacks of that stature are quite as miserable not playing. Arch Manning's not going to play at Texas this year unless something weird happens. Seems like he might be fine with that. Nico Imaleva seems poised to at least not begin the year as Tennessee quarterback, and maybe he doesn't finish the year as Tennessee starting quarterback. And every, piece of evidence we have suggests that he might be kind of fine with that too. That we're kind of in a different age now. Maybe this is one of the things that NIL has done, and this is just me speculating. I have no idea if this is even true, but it sort of seems like it might be true. That quarterbacks are a little bit happier not to play in the NIL age because the theory, as I would explain it, is, hey, it's your money. If you want to pay me to sit, that's fine. So just keep that in mind of, if Georgia gets a prospect like Raiola, he may be far and away the best player at the position on the roster, and therefore you have to play him. But if he's not, then maybe, because of age, experience, things like that, then maybe Dylan may, be a little bit like some of these other five-star quarterbacks who are just sort of okay with that for a year or so. Johnny Surfdog says, no way Raiola breaks into that rotation. See, this once again, Johnny's a great commenter. I love his comments. But some of y'all are way more confident making very assured predictions about things that you haven't seen than I am. I am very, very careful about speaking with certainty about things that I have not seen with my own eyes. And Carson Beck included, by the way. What I will tell you that I've seen with my own eyes is a guy who looked very, very sharp on G-Day and a guy who sounded very, very poised in all of his press conference stuff and podcast interview, things like that. But I am still not ready to say for sure what Beck's going to be on the field this year. I believe if he's the starting quarterback for Georgia, then he'll succeed at a level similar to a typical Georgia starting quarterback. That's just what the law of averages would suggest. But in terms of some people already have him as better than Stetson Bennett. I'm not ready to go there yet. And when it comes to guys like Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton, I genuinely believe that those are two of the better prospects you could ever have on your roster waiting in the wings to potentially become a starting quarterback. But would I bet my mortgage on either one of those guys being super successful? I wouldn't bet on any quarterback in that regard. So, to me, quarterback situations have a way of playing out in kind of an unpredictable fashion. That's just kind of the way that it goes. And I think this, could be no different. That if we say, well, Beck's the guy this year, and then next year it's a Dylan Raiola, Brock Vandagriff, Gunnar Stockton type thing, I would tell you I'm of the belief that almost anything could happen. I talked earlier about the Georgia quarterback situation kind of getting to more of a normal situation where experience probably is a pretty heavy, weapon in something like that. Maybe that's the case, but I mean, who's to say what happens when it comes to something like that? Howard Eubank says the Georgia playbook takes some time to master. I think that's probably true. But I also think, so let's say that Raiola came in, and let's say that talent-wise, he was at a 9.5 and everybody else was like at an 8.5 or an 8 or something like that. Let's just say there was a recognizable talent edge that Raiola had over the others. At that point, I don't believe the Georgia coaches would say, you're on the bench because you don't know this onerous playbook. Kirby Smart talked about what Georgia asks of its quarterbacks. If Raiola had the clear talent edge, like obvious, measurable distance between himself and the other guys from a talent standpoint, Georgia would find a way to use him. They would find a way, I believe, to create a playbook, to take advantage of those skill sets, because eventually a good system matched with the better talent is probably the overall better way for Georgia to go. That's not what I'm saying would happen or will happen when it comes to all of that. But, a good coach, if they see a clear talent edge, would try to find a way to use that talent edge. In other words, I think the job of coaches, especially veteran, successful coaches like Georgia, I think the job of coaches sometimes is to move in the direction of the player and not to ask the player to move in the direction of the coach. In other words, hey, I'm here. This is my system. I'm rigid. If you want to succeed, you got to move towards me. You got to learn what I know. No, I think sometimes good coaching is, let me recognize what you know, and let me try to find a way to get the best out of you based on what it is that you know, what it is you're currently capable of, if that makes sense. G. Gray says Raiola would sit 1 year max if he commits. Maybe so, but 1 year is still 1 year. Let's see what else. Kirby's belt on the subject of, I mean, maybe so. I mean, I think a lot of that just probably, like, where you stand in a situation like that sort of probably depends on where you sit, right? Like, everybody's got their perspective. Everybody's got their side of the story. And to me, that's just so far away from football that I just don't have that much to say about it. I just don't. And there are plenty of people who have had plenty to say about it. I am just not one of those people. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says Kirby's going to play the guy who gives us the best chance. That's all I know. If Raiola is that guy, he'll start. If someone else, then they'll start. Yeah, Paul, that kind of goes back to what Kirby said in that clip we played off the top of the show. That, people make such a big deal about how to finesse a quarterback situation and keep everybody happy. But as Kirby Smart talked about, hey, and he didn't say it exactly how I'm going to say it, but I believe this is what he insinuated. The first job is you have to decide who the best guy is. Like people have a tendency this day and age to sort of fixate on the number 2 and number 3 quarterback in a situation. But making sure you know the number 1 quarterback, like, that's the coach's job. You got to really be able to identify that. I think you're right. SEM dog, I'm not reading that. That's very funny, but I'm not reading that. DT gives big ups to Kaylee over at DawgNation.com for graduating. Yeah, Kaylee is great to work with. We're super happy to have her as a part of what we do around here. John Carter says every dog fan should want to start their day with Kirby firing them up. Yeah. Sometimes I thought about, you kind of get like a sound effect basically put on your alarm, like, get that thing from the stadium and like, please rise. It's time to attack today, and have the Baba O'Reilly playing. That'd be a pretty good alarm clock in the morning, for sure. Let me go back over to Facebook. We'll get ready to wrap up after that. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says the comment must have been X-rated. It really wasn't that. Just with the stuff around the White House, some of the conversations have sort of, veered in the direction of political. Not even like partisan political, but just the kind of thing that people are just so thin-skinned these days. Like you heard me even ask Jake Fromm that. It's like I'm sure you don't want to talk about politics, and Jake sort of had that nervous laugh. It's like nobody. It's a shame that we can't even, we have to be so careful about, certain conversations because people just get their feelings hurt easy, and that's true on both sides, by the way. Ken Holcomb says they were throwing going back to the Tennessee thing from earlier, they were throwing the goalpost in the river thinking they could use it later as a boat anchor for their John boat. Yeah, there you go. Kent's also way up there in North Georgia, so not a surprise that Kent likes to give it to those Tennessee Vols. You can sort of tell where people live based on the Georgia rival they sort of talk the most about, and Kent has some fun with that. Brandon Griffin offers this for the Florida schedule. How about playing in Athens, then Gainesville, then Athens, then Jacksonville, repeat? It wouldn't be too bad, maybe. I mean, I've sort of been in favor of either play it always in Jacksonville or never in Jacksonville, but I think the thing that you kind of take from yesterday is that the reports of the cocktail party's demise, to quote, I guess, Mark Twain, have been greatly exaggerated. It sounds like the cocktail party has a little bit more life still in it than I realized. That at the very least, this is maybe not going to be the last year. In fact, just to kind of be blunt here, I sort of have the impression that the option years will be picked up. So you get 2 years. And that's why I think there was some – I mean, if I had – and obviously this is just me trying to figure this all out. But so you get the contract year ends with this season's game. And I believe it's June 30th, which is not that long from now. The two schools have to let it be known if they plan on exercising their option years. And that's why I think there's some dispute about when the renovations to the stadium would take place. Would they take place in 24-25 or 25-26, whatever that is, because you get the option years here coming up. So there's some dispute about when these stadium renovations might actually start. But if I had to predict right now, and we'll find this out, a little bit more than a month, I believe that the two schools are going to exercise their options on the Georgia-Florida game, which I did not think was going to happen. So the game in Jacksonville may actually have a little bit more of a life to it than I originally realized. And that's, I think, kind of interesting. Jacob O'Neill says Kaylee Mansell was in on Facebook a minute ago. That's always nice, yeah. Good to see Kaylee checking in over on the Facebook side. That's good. I'm glad to know that. Let's see what else. Mitchell Proctor says, what's your opinion on a third rival for a 9-game schedule after Florida and Auburn? Well, Mitchell, you and I are on the same page on this, that the two games that you'd have to play in a 9-game slate would be Florida and Auburn. For me, the third would be either Tennessee or South Carolina. Now, Tennessee seems more relevant now. Georgia probably has a longer history with South Carolina. But either way, those are the two games that are just the easiest to drive to. They're both about 3 hours from Athens. But it sounds like that's not necessarily what the league's going to do. They might actually be more prone to give Georgia, like, say, Kentucky, because I guess South Carolina doesn't want to play Georgia every year. I think the point here on this is a couple of things. First of all, I don't know that anybody's going to get all three of their choices for permanent opponents. That you may get one or two of what you want. You may have to sort of take what the league gives you on the other side of that. And so this would be an example of that, where it's like, you got to play Florida, you got to play Auburn. The third opponent's debatable, so you probably just sort of take whoever they give you. But here's the other thing, too. And I can't quite tell how much of this is like just negotiating posture and how much of this is kind of real. But last year, my understanding is in May, at the SEC spring meetings, which are actually coming up here in just a little bit, that in May, a year ago, the SEC wanted to announce their new scheduling format. And I believe that would have been a 9-game conference slate. But they didn't get unanimous support on this from everybody else in the league. Kentucky was reportedly very vocally against the expansion to a 9-game conference slate. So the point here is, here we are a year later, and for a while, I think certainly me, maybe a lot of us assume that this was just delayed, but eventually the announcement was going to come. I'm starting to get the sense, based on some of the stuff that's been out there, that it's not obvious the league's going to choose a 9-game conference slate. Now, I think what they're really trying to do is they're trying to hold that back from ESPN because they want more money. I mean, it's just all this always ends up being about money, and this is just another one of those examples. And ESPN, I guess, has been slow to want to give extra money for better and extra inventory, an additional SEC game. And so right now there's a little bit of a stalemate based on that. So we will see. But there's already some resistance to an expansion to a 9-game conference schedule because teams like Kentucky or Missouri, teams like that, they need the non-conference game for the money and for the win because it gives them a chance to go to a bowl game when they otherwise might not be able to. So the point here is that if you don't go to a 9-game conference schedule based on the kind of format the SEC wants to use, you can only have one permanent opponent. Now, I believe that'd be for Georgia, Florida, which means the Georgia-Auburn game would not be played every year anymore, which I just think would be a real shame. Tennessee, Alabama wouldn't be played every year anymore. I think that'd be a real shame. Texas A&M wouldn't be able to be played every year because I believe the Texas permanent opponent would be Oklahoma in that case. I think that would be a real shame. That it would just be a real shame if somehow ESPN, from a monetary standpoint, prevents the SEC, or if the SEC's own decision-making, however you want to frame this, would prevent the league from providing the kinds of games that you expand the SEC to be able to provide. That would just be nonsense to me. But, I mean, there's at least some posturing that could happen, and I think we're all kind of curious to see how real some of that is. William Camacho asking about when South Carolina joined the SEC. So around 92, I believe their first year in the SEC would have been around 92. But when I was a kid, prior to that, Georgia still played South Carolina every year back then, even when they weren't an SEC team. And Georgia did not play Tennessee every year back then. So Georgia played Tennessee in 80 and 81, and then didn't play them again until 1988. That was not a regular conference game for Georgia. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says, I feel like DawgNation Daily is complete now. Always fun, and then some education sprinkled in. A good day. Well, Lucy, I'm glad you feel that way. All right, final comments. Yeah, Randy Hall, we're still here. Oh, gosh, it got late. Yeah, we're getting ready to go. But glad you're here. John Carter, appreciate you being here, too. He says the SEC is going to be at 10 years, $3 billion, while the Big Ten's get 7 for $7 billion. I mean, big time money and dollars being thrown around right now. All right. Thomas Tyson says Jacob Eason would have been a killer pitcher. Yeah, I wonder if he pitched in high school. That would have been kind of a big, tall frame like that, big, strong arm. He would have been a great pitcher. Now, the strike zone may have been an issue, and I'll just leave it that kindly. But yeah, for sure. All right, Thomas Tyson's checking out. We're checking out there as well. Appreciate all of you being here. Y'all check out the AJC online, ajc.com. Braves get back going here with a weekend series. I believe I have this right. They played they're in the midst of 5 straight series against American League teams. Amazing, right? This is a new year for Major League Baseball scheduling where you're playing every team in Major League Baseball. So they're in a big stretch of American League play right now. Blue Jays this weekend. Also, we did find out about the NFL schedules yesterday. Falcons do get Panthers week 1. Probably both teams have that circled as a potential win. So that's kind of fun. Also, in 13 different things do around the Metro Atlanta area this weekend for, late spring, Mother's Day, all that kind of stuff. Find all that online at ajc.com. Also, check out R.S. Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that, including, with the hot weather here, getting your AC unit tuned up to factory fresh specs. Very important thing to be able to do. So find R.S. Andrews online for more on that. rsandrews.com. They'll get it tuned up to factory fresh specs. They'll keep you cool and comfortable. Get some new life out of that old unit. Maybe somebody else has told you need to replace it. R.S. Andrews can tell you how you can keep it and get more life out of it. So you got to find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. Y'all have a great weekend. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.